it's time to start acknowledging that Microsoft's acquisition of all these third-party studios, Activision, Blizzard, Obsidian, Bethesda, all of them have essentially ended in an objective failure. Xbox is on the way out. Phil Spencer has acknowledged this. Game Pass is failing. Starfield couldn't bring people over. Like, it's over. Okay? Xbox is done. And with it, the entire AAA space. Because going forward, no longer will companies like PlayStation be able to lean into a lot of these Western companies, right? These big Western companies that defined the Western gaming sphere in the past decade. Who created the stereotype that Western video games are worse, right? Like all of these studios that exist that people pretended were good for the past 15 years, while actual critics like me were calling them out for being trash like immediately. Like, all the games that the industry propped up and tried to pretend were great, games like Skyrim, games like Call of Duty, games like Overwatch, StarCraft 2, Hearthstone, Psychonauts 2, right? Uh, like all of these games that were propped up by the industry are falling by the wayside. They're done. People are losing interest. They're moving on. And even the big AAA projects, the big new IP that's supposed to be the game of the generation, Starfield, which I think is safe to say the biggest project that Microsoft had under their helm this generation, it's a complete and total flop, right? Nobody wants to acknowledge this, but Microsoft was not able to salvage the project. Now, Starfield was always going to fail. It was never going to do well. It really had nothing to do with Microsoft at all. Let's not kid ourselves here. Bethesda was going downhill long before Microsoft acquired them. Same with Activision Blizzard, same with Double Fine, excuse me, Take Two. What am I talking about? Double Fine, same with Obsidian. Like all of these companies were going downhill. The issue was before the acquisition, nobody wanted to admit it, right? The major thing now is that now that these are Microsoft exclusive brands, PlayStation fanboys now have a target, right? Now that they're not getting these games anymore, they're perfectly comfortable calling them trash. PlayStation fanboys, in a lot of ways, are going to be the death of these brands because with a significant portion of the audience fighting back against everything you release just because of the console it's on, you are not going to have the same kind of success you once had. At the very least, you'll have split your audience in half, right? Probably more than that because let's be honest, PlayStation was always more relevant than Xbox, but like the reality is acquiring all these brands and releasing a bunch of mediocre games was never ever ever going to drive people to your platform. All right, this was a last ditch effort by Microsoft to remain relevant, and it failed. Phil Spencer has acknowledged it failed, and now like we're in the middle of this transition period where Microsoft awkwardly just kind of has to leave the console industry because there's really nowhere for them to go here. Like, what exactly do you buy an Xbox for in 2024? You can't say it's for multimedia because smart TVs and like there are better options. You can legit buy like a Fire Stick, an Amazon Fire Stick for like $50 and get like a better experience than you would have if you tried to use an Xbox One as your media home center, right? Like it's not to play games because Nintendo does that better, right? It's not to like uh, there's nothing that Xbox excels at this point. Like it has no audience other than an increasingly aging delusional fan base that believed Halo was something revolutionary when it came out in 2001. It wasn't. Like Xbox was always crap, but what's happening now is that people are starting to acknowledge it's crap. People are starting to acknowledge that like its games and the console appeals to no one. The console as a whole is just a complete abject failure, and you don't see enough people acknowledge it. Everyone bends over backwards to try and tell you that like, oh, Xbox is competing, it's doing really well, Game Pass is hugely successful. It's not like they just keep trying to do this thing, like other than address the reality that Xbox is simply not viable anymore. Like it simply is destroying video games. I would argue Xbox has been like the primary reason gaming has gone downhill so quickly with a company like Nintendo, who is the objective good force in gaming, doing so well and existing. Like Xbox was the company that introduced like DLC and like the online features, the stuff that's like really ruined gaming over the past 20 years. Nobody really likes acknowledging all of the poor decisions that Xbox has made. And even though that nobody's acknowledging it, nobody's talking about it at all, everybody's like bending over backwards, making excuses for them all the time. The reality is that like nobody really enjoys the product. Nobody really likes the project, likes the property. And I think that in a lot of ways is more suggestive about where the brand actually is than any amount of like fanboys like screaming on the internet about how Xbox is totally good, man. Like the reality is Xbox is done, right? They can't compete with any of their competition. There is nowhere for them to go from here except leave the console industry. Like I expect they'll be setting up a streaming service, probably a competitor to Amazon Luna. It's gonna be like their own thing with their own exclusive titles. They've already shown an interest in partnering with Nintendo, so it's possible that all these Xbox acquisitions are mostly going to be available on Nintendo through this streaming service, right? I don't expect we will continue to see this these games being neglected on Nintendo hardware. It's going to be harder and harder and harder to justify staying off of Nintendo hardware. We're already kind of seeing this with games like Doom Eternal and Mortal Kombat 1 and stuff like that. Like companies just don't succeed when they try to neglect Nintendo like they have traditionally. The reality is that that Nintendo has stomped out another one of their competitors, and it won't be much longer until PlayStation follows suit. It won't be much longer until PC gaming follows suit. It won't be much longer until people acknowledge that mobile gaming isn't worth anyone's time, and then Nintendo will essentially control the gaming market through their monopoly, which they earned, honestly. Nintendo is the best in the industry, and it is time that people acknowledge that very real fact.